Some call it creche, others manger, and others nacimiento. But whatever you call it, celebrating the creche is an ancient Christian tradition. And this year in downtown Toronto, the Friends of the Creche are holding their international convention. And they've invited artists from around the globe to display their nativity scenes. So tonight we speak with one artist who plans to do something a little different. For thousands of years, artists have been inspired by Christ's nativity, and each trying to unlock the joyful mystery of Christ's birth. So we invited Timothy Schmalz, an internationally recognized sculptor who hails from St. Jacobs, Ontario, to our studios to tell us more about what inspires him and what he has planned for this year's Creche Convention. Timothy, thank you for being with us today.
You're welcome.
So to start out, tell us about yourself and how you came to be a sculptor.
Well, I started sculpting when I was around 16 years old, and I just had a passion for it. And I would start discovering beautiful Renaissance artwork that really, really moved me. And so what I did was I just devoted all of my time. And when I went to, or when I finished high school, I went to Ontario College of Art, and I just continued ever since now, basically doing artwork.
So tell us about some of the projects that you've undertaken.
I think some of my greatest pieces are not necessarily my largest, but I've done some of Canada's largest sculptures, a Sudbury mining monument, which has 900 miners in. I did the probably the largest representation of the Holy Family for Bethlehem. I created a huge sculpture of St. Patrick for Ireland. And so I've done a lot of different pieces in my 20 years of doing bronze work.
In your bio, it says that you create art to convert. Tell us what that means.
Well, art to convert. The idea that I have faith in artwork. I have faith that it is very, very powerful. Advertisements, or companies know this all the time with their advertisements. It affects people. And what I believe is, and my hope is, that if I create a wonderful sculpture, it will empower people and make them feel more strong about their faith, or make them see their faith in a different light.
What do you see as being the challenge with art today?
Well, there's two challenges. There's a challenge of mainstream art, and that is that a lot of the artwork has become, I would say, almost useless by being a dog circling for its tail. I feel that it's artwork that is self-reflective, and so it's all about visual puns. It's all about who's the most clever person to come up with the newest idea. And that's the modern artwork, contemporary secular artwork. But I believe that Christian artwork has as much of a challenge. The problem I see with Christian artwork is it's almost like a face on a coin, that over years and years and years, the face gets worn down by people touching it. The images become invisible. People walk into a church, they don't even see the sculpture of the Sacred Heart of the Mary. It becomes irrelevant in a sense. So the challenge in the Christian artwork and in the Christian world is to create bright new images that actually make people look again. And maybe not necessarily to look in a different point of view, but just to at least make them look. Mm-hmm. I think it's also, with Christian artwork, it's representing a reality and a truth that sometimes is missed with mass-produced factory artwork. And so the challenge is really to be truthful and to really bring in new, crisp images that people will actually see.
So how did you get involved with the Creche Convention this year?
That's an interesting story. I believe I'm working next year on a Holy Family exhibition sponsored by the National Knights of Columbus, and they were talking about my sculpture, and they realized that I'm just, an hour and a half from Toronto, so I was invited to showcase some of my sculpture here, so it was kind of interesting.
So what do you plan to do for the exhibit?
Well, I'm showcasing my most famous piece, A Quiet Moment, which is of the Holy Family, which, yes, it could be considered a nativity. But it's a very special time considering that I'm bringing my latest sculpture, which is a brand new nativity. And for years I wanted to do a strict nativity, not a Holy Family, but a nativity. And I feel that it's a very, very difficult thing to do, simply because there are so many nativities out there. To take this image that has been in every which way interpreted and to bring new life in it is what I'm working on right now, and it is going absolutely wonderful.
What have you done to prepare spiritually? And I figure you'd also have to prepare physically, because these are huge undertakings.
Well, the interesting thing is with this piece, and this is how wonderful some of my creative process works. It just hit me. The whole thing just hit me. The whole idea. I was actually sitting at the computer, and I just, in around 3 strokes of my pen on a piece of paper, I came up with this idea. And the idea is something I have never, ever seen before on a nativity. And thanks for technology today. I Googled out, I did a research, and oh my God, this concept has never been done. And so preparing spiritually, the idea hit me instantly and just started running with it. And so I've been spending days in my studio working on the details. So what I'm bringing to this event is something that I've started, and the journey's halfway done right now.
And at the event, you're going to have a live model. So what's all involved with that?
Well, like Michelangelo and like all the great Renaissance sculptors, they would always refer to models on specific aspects of their work. Now, this piece here, I'm bringing in a model for some details of the hands. I am, in a sense, cross-referencing what I created. My sculpture is very spontaneous. It came to me like a snap, and that's why I like to say it's God's will in a sense. A minute before, I had no idea on what to do with the nativity, and all of a sudden, a second later, it's all laid out in my mind. And so it's like what I usually say, it's kind of like the instrument of peace idea that St. Francis of Assisi suggested. But what I'll be doing with my model is I'll be working on just cross-referencing to make sure it has enough reality, enough likeness, although it is a pretty abstract sculpture. I might be working on the hands of the Mary sculpture, the eyes perhaps, and just really making it a little bit more detailed.
Okay, for those of us who don't know anything about sculpture, how does this process typically work? Can you just take us from the beginning right through to the end?
The beginning is inspiration from God.
Right.
And without that, you can do nothing. If you don't have a great idea, it's very difficult to wake up and start sculpting. But thank God, sometimes you have amazing ideas that hit you, and then you have to have faith with it. And then you have to basically take that risk, hold that faith, and actually just start working. And sometimes that process is difficult. It's almost like a sleepy person not wanting to get out of bed, because there's some sort of risk involved when you first start out a piece. But once you actually start the piece, then it can be a wonderful meditative ride. It's almost like when I create a piece, usually it's out of clay. Usually what I do is I have a piece of wood stuck in a mound of clay, and then almost like rosary beads, I'm applying piece by piece by piece and building up this form. And so it can be very, very spiritual at some times, where it's almost like I'm transformed into a very meditative, contemplative space. Other times it's like digging a ditch. It's just, drudgery work. But throughout each piece, you're going to have the times where you feel like you're on a beautiful ride, and then you're going to have times that it's like you're sanding a piece of wood for 10 hours or so. But once the clay piece is done, and that's a very difficult thing to say, is actually when is the piece done. You get to, if you have a sculpture that's going well, then you become very super cautious. I don't want to change anything, because then in an instant I could wipe away whatever essence that is powerful within the piece. But it's almost like you have to be the conductor of this process, and you have to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. You have to make some executive decisions on when the piece is done or if it needs more. The great thing about clay is you can change things around. You can manipulate something, and if you don't like it, you can try to get it back. But after the piece is done in the clay, a mold is made, and then simply bronze is poured in, and you have a bronze sculpture.
You describe your work as visual sermons. Does that all begin in the studio, or is that sort of how people perceive it? Like, what do you mean by that?
It's like what we mentioned before, the advertisement approach. I had an interesting project once that I was working on, and I was working on the sculpture of the one body. I think you've seen it. You have a small one here where it's all hundreds of saints. I think there's like 150 different saints in the piece. And someone walked in my studio as a truck driver, and he saw it, and he was mesmerized. He looked at it for a long time, and he was just, this is absolutely awesome. And he was fixated. And other people that had no connection towards Catholicism would bring their friends in to see this piece. And I think Soren Kierkegaard mentioned the same is essentially with fiction writing or creating works of literature, is you bring people in, and then once you have their attention, then you can actually present a message. Ideally, they will take a look at one of my sculptures, and questions will arise. Mm-hmm. And then it becomes more like a nice way to get across an awesome message. And Christianity has absolutely amazing messages, but it's the challenge is in a world today where so many people are demanding your attention, to create not a sound bite but a visual bite that will capture someone's imagination and their attention for more than a couple seconds.
Okay, so tell us about the piece that you're going to be creating for the Creche conference, or that you're going to be working on there.
Yeah.
What is the visual soundbite there? What is the emotion that you're trying to evoke, or part of that nativity story that you're trying to capture?
For this piece here, I have pursued the idea of creating absolute joy within a newborn, and to actually have Joseph with his arms up high in praise to God for this wonderful creation here. And one of the things that I'm working on is I'm very aware of who's going to be looking at this. And I want this to be looked at by fathers. I want fathers to see themselves in that Joseph. I want mothers to see themselves. And that's one of the wonderful things about a nativity. It's the family, and everyone has that identification with the family. And so instead of a lot of the very traditional nativities where it seems very quiet, it's just very peaceful, this is more like a blast. This is a very loud celebration of a nativity, of Christmas in a sense.
Well, that's very different from another nativity-like scene that you did. I think you called it Tranquility.
Yes.
Where Mary's actually lying down with the baby and Joseph is looking over her. What inspired you to then do that version of the nativity? Yeah,
the Tranquility came to me at the time where I wanted to do something that was very, very realistic. I have, at that point in time, I did several different Holy Families, and I would imagine myself, I'd put myself into that position. And that's, I think, the idea of creating realism within a sculpture. I wanted to have intimacy being shown, love personified by physical closeness with these figures, and I think they were very successful, and I think that message is conveyed, and it's such a soft, beautiful message, because it is that gentle, delicate, beautiful peace that a family has together. Mm-hmm. This nativity that I'm working on right now, it's a joy, it's a celebration, it's like a Christmas carol being shouted out, and not only is it the gestures of the figures and the expressions on their faces showing joy, but also the rhythm and the lines of the piece. Each different fold of fabric is not just a bit of cloth, but for me it's an opportunity to create a pattern that almost like a musical note or rhythm actually creates an upward movement. So if you look at the piece, each line of the striations of the fabric is going up like an ascension. It almost looks like a risen Christ to a certain degree.
There are going to be lots of people there. What do you think will that add anything to the experience of sculpting with the onlookers?
I love it, and I think that for I remember thinking about this one thing years ago when I did sculpture. I love Rome. If I could go anywhere for like an hour or a year, it would be Rome. And looking at being a Christian sculptor, looking at all these sculptures, I came back at one of my trips there, and I thought there's one horrible message that these sculptures bring, and that is that Christianity is old, and it's. And that's when I see some beautiful Berninis that are outside, if I see a sculpture of a saint crumbling, though it's absolutely beautiful, it also makes me sad in a sense, because I don't want our faith, Christianity, Catholicism, to look like an antique. And so when someone comes to a show in downtown Toronto like this and sees an actual sculptor creating a brand new nativity and that has never been seen before, it's saying something about the religion too. It's saying that our faith, our Catholicism is alive and growing, just like the artwork is. So
right.
It's exciting.
So besides the Creche Convention, what else do you have in the works?
It's a wonderful time for me. I have two really amazing sculptures that I'm working on. I did a sculpture of Saint or Christ washing St. Peter's feet. I did it for Las Vegas around 6 years ago, and something really bothered me about it. And what it was there was too much food on the plate. It almost looked like I took a Renaissance painting and stretched it out, and here came the scene in 3 dimensions. And I was actually going to a church 2 weeks ago, and throughout my mind, I heard this voice that was saying, why did Christ wash St. Peter's feet? And basically, all day, my whole trip, this question kept on occurring to me. In the morning, I woke up and I had the most beautiful idea. Christ, on his knees, holding a washcloth in his one hand, with a water basin and a water flask, and an empty seat beside him. And that's my sculpture. And it's an invitation. It's a challenge. It's a welcoming. And now there's room for, when you visually see this, that there's room for you to come in. Another piece that I'm going to be starting just recently is, and this is from actually being in Toronto, my last trip to Toronto. I saw a homeless man sleeping on a bench. And for me, living out in the country, I used to live in the city, but I don't see that very much. And when you move out of the city, and for a couple years, and then you see a human being sleeping on a bench in the middle of the day, it shocks you. It really does. And that just moved me so much. I'm going to be doing a sculpture of Christ sleeping on a bench, with a sleeping bag wrapped around him, with bare feet, and the wounds visible on his bare feet. And this is a piece that can be either displayed on a park bench setting or on the ground. And the idea is, and this is what happens, just like the Peter washing Christ's feet that I did 5 years ago. When you do this as obsessively as I am, you have conversations with sculptures. And this one of a homeless Christ is kind of a comment about the "whatsoever you do, I did," which is a depiction of Christ as a beggar with his hand out. But even that to me seems a little bit too proper. He's sitting up, or at least he's sitting cross-legged and his hands out begging. But there's something a little bit more raw. There's something a little bit more hopeless about someone sleeping outside. And to have it Christ is a very powerful message. So then hopefully the next time someone sees one of these forms, human forms, sleeping under a heat vent or something, they'll say, that is Christ. And that's what I want my sculptures to do, is to give those visual messages. And I can do it. And so right now, for the last week or so, as I'm working on these sculptures, I'm also thinking about the next sculptures I want and how I can gracefully and represent this with power and some rawness. So I'm also doing a very interesting processional cross. 20 years ago, the risen Christ was prominent in a lot of new churches being built. Let's have a big risen Christ. People are becoming aware right now of the idea of the suffering of Christ. The crucifixion is something that is crucial to be behind the altar. I'm going to be creating a processional cross, and they can't be that big, so visually they can't take up that much power. But what I'm doing is I'm creating a processional cross that actually is put in, I can show you some sketches, actually put in a Mount Calvary scene. So at the beginning of Mass, you'll have this whole scene, everything, Roman soldiers, the two Marys, St. John, skulls, skeletons on the ground, except for one thing, the Christ and the crucifixion or the cross. So almost like theater, as the Mass begins, the processional cross comes in, it's just not in a stand, it completes the scene. So that gives the opportunity of a church that wants to have a real big visual presence of the crucifixion without having a 10-foot processional cross, because it has to be small because kids are going to be carrying it. Right? So that's exciting because it's like theater. It's taking something very traditional like a processional cross and kind of saying, how else can I represent this? And I think that's part of being a Christian sculptor. It's almost like you can look at a beautiful gem straight on, and it's one thing, you learn about it. But if you start taking it in your hand and turning it around and looking how the light reflects in the different angles, you begin to understand that gem, and you appreciate that gem a little bit more. Same with artwork. It's the Nativity. There's beautiful nativities out there, 500 years of beautiful nativities. Who am I to actually do another one? Well, the thing is, if I can show just one little aspect, one little turn, one little reflection of light with my piece, then I've contributed to the whole narration of Christian sculpture.
Thank you so much, Timothy, for being with us today. To find out more about Timothy's work, please visit sculpturebytps.com. Thank you. This is the first time Canada hosted the Friends of the Creche Convention. The convention featured displays from every time period and culture, and hundreds of delegates from all over the world gathered to share stories of hope and to celebrate the creche as an enduring symbol of our faith. The convention also gave delegates an opportunity to meet with artists, and we were fortunate to spend some time with one of our very own. Timothy Schmalz is a sculptor who is based in Kitchener, Ontario. And to find out more, visit sculpturebytps.com. And that's all for tonight. Thank you for watching Catholic Focus.